388. You know it's bad when you start singing your own theme music.
Mario Brothers is your own theme music?
No, just in general, when you start like narrating your own life, when you're like, you know, I've been known to cronk out like, "Bah." Yeah, we're live by the way, so people are listening to this conversation.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Nothing like just going out strong. Hello and welcome to Tuesday Night with Maggie and Kirk. We're talking about The Very Best Bad Idea, chapter 4 this week, which is called Everything Right is Wrong Again? No. Everything, I don't remember. I wrote it, but I didn't pay attention. Yeah, Everything Right is Wrong Again, which is a They Might Be Giants song title, and I'm a nerd, so I'm a big fan of They Might Be Giants. So there you go. So how have you been this week? It's been an interesting, at least on my end, it's been an interestingly eventful week. How have things been on the Maggie front?
I feel the same. It's been very eventful.
Yeah. Yep. Good stuff. So we were saying kind of at the top, this is a shorter chapter, so it might be a little bit of a shorter stream, but I think this is also one of my favorite chapters. Because it's when I start really introducing some of my biggest issues with the current thought management of at least Western culture, or at least America, how we don't teach problem solving. We teach tutorialized sets. We teach this is the way that we solve this. This is the ABC. These are the steps. This is the tutorialized set on how to reach the agreed upon solution. And anything outside of that is in many cases penalized until you get to a level that you no longer kind of have a desire to look outside of that paradigm. They ingrain the paradigm so much that that's all you see or that's all you care about. And then they give you permission to look outside of it. But by that point, they've obscured the tinfoil hat wearing they. So before we're jumping straight into that, thoughts on the kind of the thesis statement there?
The chapter heading?
Yeah, just the too long didn't read. The basically what I just said. The fact that we do not teach people how to solve problems. We do not teach our children how to solve problems. We teach them how to follow instructions. Right. And one of the reasons that I'm most interested to talk to you about this is that you've homeschooled your children. So have all of your children been one of your children is in public school or private school or public? So I'm interested because my wife was raised in almost entirely homeschool. She went to private school for 1 year, and then we homeschooled our kids for 1 year before we realized that before the pandemic, we did actual homeschooling 1 year and realized that was a mistake. And then we did, of course, did it this year. It wasn't homeschool per se, but what everyone's done this year. But I'd love to talk to you kind of specifically about this concept of problem solving versus instructions following, which are not the same thing, but we teach them like they are.
Right. So this is a big reason why we did homeschool, and we were really young when we went into having children, but we were still in high school when we got pregnant with our first one. And so we knew that we wanted to homeschool like off the jump, like we knew. And one of the big reasons why was because, as I say, they teach you what to think, not how to think.
Yes, exactly.
And that was always a big problem for me. I mean, there was other things, but it really just came down to that. So this has been my favorite chapter thus far too, because it really just, preaching to the choir. Like, honestly, I really agree with basically everything that you said in there. Yeah. So your thesis statement, 100%.
Awesome. I almost never get, Maggie, seals of approval with that clearing the bar there.
I'm a hard one. One.
No, and for the record, it's what I love the most about breaking this all down. So hold on, I want to find a. So the other thing, the big problem we're having right now is, so I kind of break down in this chapter. We kind of go into Right now, we have something, depending on which source you look at, we have about 2.5 million STEM jobs that are vacant. And the the Bureau of Labor Statistics and some other things are saying that by 2024, 25, it could be as high as 4 million STEM jobs that are vacant. But the problem being that the current education system is not teaching an interest in STEM. It's not teaching curiosity. It's not teaching that how to think or how to ask questions. It's teaching how to and so whereas we're having this massive shortage in STEM positions, we're having this massive shortage in thinkers, we're doing very little to fix that. We're doing very little to close that gap. In fact, in many ways, we're making it worse.
Well, what I find most interesting is that they're trying to close it. They're trying to do a lot of things that are failing. And my personal hot take is that we focus too much on STEM. But I think that if we focus less on STEM, we'd actually have more people in careers that were STEM. That was STEM. So my husband actually, he brought this up recently to me. I can't remember who said it. It might have been Zuckerberg, but said that one of the problems with the public school system is that they don't teach you how to think. They don't teach you how to have an imagination. They don't teach you how to problem solve. They push the STEM, but they're not actually teaching you the things that you need to know in order to go into STEM.
Right.
So I really think that humanities is incredibly important, and I mean, if you think that we're not teaching STEM enough, get a load of humanities, because we are not teaching humanities nearly enough. And honestly, it sounds counterproductive or counterintuitive, but that education in humanities is important for STEM as well. And I think would make people want to go into STEM even more.
So Mallory Musselman asked on YouTube, do we think that private schools are better than public schools or vice versa? Now I'm going to, before we answer, I'm going to add two more categories in there. There's public, there's private, there's charter, which is public but isn't public. And there's also homeschooling, which can either follow a public or private curriculum or straight up unschooling, et cetera, et cetera. And my answer, and I'm really interested in yours, my answer is yes. And that is that the problem is treating children like they all are going to follow in anything resembling a tutorialized set. That doesn't exist. A system of teaching that will work for all people doesn't exist. So public school, private school, charter school, unschooling, which is I have mixed feelings on. I didn't say bad feelings, very mixed feelings on. There's all these different things. Like I said, we did homeschooling for 1 year. We applied to be accepted into this kind of public-ish curriculum where they kind of checked on you, and we didn't make it in because of stupid reasons. So we ended up doing, like, we downloaded booklets and stuff. Like, we did true homeschooling, like no outside sources of anything. And I will say that I know people personally that have thrived in each of those, and I know people that have been unbelievably hindered by people really trying very hard. So I don't think that there's such thing as a best. I think there is an ideal fit for each type of thinker. And that as long as we're not teaching people to think, we're teaching people to follow directions, we're always going to be chasing the curriculum instead of teaching someone anything. That's my take.
I agree with you. I think that we have to ask what we mean by better as well. So if we're talking about my gauge about education is who comes out knowing how to think, knowing how to problem solve, having ideas and the ability to voice them, etc. Really being introduced to the world of ideas and thoughts historically and scientifically and all that stuff. Private schools are better by and large. Above everything else, private schools are better. But I want to say that I am a huge proponent of public schools and the public schooling system. I think that the public schooling system is incredibly important and that it's necessary. And I don't give a crap about my tax dollars going there. I prefer them to go there than many a place. So I'm not anti-public school by any stretch of the imagination. However, the way that we go about public school, especially in America, especially in California, leaves a lot to be desired. A lot to be desired. There's a
that last sentence again. Just say that again.
the way that we go about public schooling in the US, especially California.
Okay. No, I agreed. No, yeah, absolutely. We had two comments I wanted to get to real quick. First, Debbie said the reason for homeschooling can matter a lot in terms of how effective that schooling is. And I really, really agree with that. Like, I am not in any way, I'm very pro freedoms of all kinds. If you hate the establishment and don't want to, like, I don't care if you're a tinfoil hat wearer or a religious evangelist, but your purpose for for homeschooling can affect greatly what that education actually is, which is one of those things. Like, half of me is like, so we should probably have some standards, and the other half of me is like, no, that's kind of the point. Like, it's
anti-standards.
Yeah, I have very low standards, but like, but no. So I completely agree with this statement. At the same time, yeah. Then Colin followed that up with, when I attended Catholic school, they integrated STEM the year I graduated from, and my high school already had it years prior. At my charter high school, they have so many different STEM classes, and I'm trying to get into. And that's, I had a big problem when I moved around. I went through a different school 1st through 9th grade. Every year I went to a different school. I never went to school 2 years in a row. And I will say that I moved from Puyallup, Washington, which is a suburb of Tacoma, which is a suburb of Seattle, in 3rd grade. And I remember mid-year, and I remember them teaching, they were just starting multiplication. And when I got here to Northern Virginia in 3rd grade, they were already moving from standard division to long division. And I missed it. Like that I missed all of it. So the dichotomy in what we teach and how we teach and when we teach it, especially since we don't teach the thought process of it, we teach the steps to follow. I'm not saying that's why I've never caught up, but that's why I never caught up. It's big. It's a big chunk of tutorial that I never got and I never caught up.
Right. But the interesting thing is that we tend to talk about the way that non-traditional, like, so non-public schools fail, homeschooling, charter schools, private schools, but we ignore that the public school system is failing big time, like bigger than those things. And especially in California, especially in the area of California I'm in.
Sure.
And so that's something that kind of like gets to me. I am, like I said, 100% anti, oh crap, now I forgot the word, but I'm 100% anti, like, what is the word? You just said it.
Charter schools?
No. Standards.
Cool.
100% anti-standards. 100%.
Okay.
And I think that needs to be across the board. I don't like the way the public school system does it. And I know that
real quick, I want to ask a real quick question, because standards can mean two different things, and I'm fine with either. Just want to make sure. So standards, No Child Left Behind, or standards, grades.
Both.
Like,
well, no,
okay.
well, grades I'm for. Grades I'm okay with, assuming that you mean both grade level, like school, like first.
No, I meant grades as in gold star versus you're a silly boy, go to the back of the class, you dunce.
Yeah, I am totally fine with grading systems. I think that grading systems do need to be a little different. I definitely think that there's some schools into the higher education level that have like this really weird, what is it called? Oh my gosh, I am just like pooping out on like freaking words.
No, it's been a long week for me too, so I get you.
But they have quotas that they have to meet.
Quotas. Oh yeah.
They're the dumbest thing I can think of in education. Dumbest thing I can think of next to standards. Right. But really, No Child Left Behind, curriculum standards, correlation, those are really, really bad. They're bad for education, and they standardized testing. Don't even get me started.
So my this is a really long story that I don't want to get kind of all the way into the weeds with, but so I bought a house 5 years ago, which was in the same school district. It was in the same town, but we'd been renting a small house on one side of town, and we moved to a bigger house on the other side of town, which involved my daughter. The school she had gone from kindergarten through 3rd grade, she moved in 4th grade. We moved to a new school, and we went from like one of the lowest, super duper poor, free and reduced lunch, like ghetto schools, where Salem knew every single, my daughter's Salem, oldest daughter, she's 13 now. She knew everyone. She knew the janitor's name. She knew the lunch lady's name. Every teacher knew her. And I kid you not, just before the pandemic, so a little over a year ago, we were still getting stopped in Target and grocery stores around town. They were like, "Oh my gosh, you're Salem's family." Like, she was Punky Brewster that just floated through the halls, just the happiest, most bright kid. We then moved, we bought the house somewhat because of it. We moved to the really nice end of town where the schools are like 9 out of 10 and the highest grade centers and everything. And they beat the light out of Salem's eyes that fast. Within weeks and months, she was coming home upset and frustrated and angry. She went from one of the really, not top learners, not top of the class, but doing really well, and every one of her teachers loved her, to being really behind. And you could argue, well, yeah, she was in a really slow ESL, like very low to a very high. Of course she fell behind, but at the same time, I get called in and I sit down and I'm sitting across from the vice principal, a guidance counselor, a social worker, a child psychologist, and her teacher, as they say things to me like the failures of your daughter. She asks questions when everyone else is trying to move on. She doesn't understand like they're sitting here and reading me all the reasons that they're failing and blaming it on her. They're reading me all the reasons that and I come in and I show them the emails from Salem to the teacher. I show them all of these things saying like how she's being made fun of, she's being teased, she's being bullied, she's being mocked and left behind by the teacher, and how they're blaming that on her because she can't keep up. And they pulled me in to figure out what I can do to fix my daughter. And I am not a helicopter parent. Like, I am not that guy. Like, I'm not going to blame teachers for my kids, but Salem tries really, really hard, and she loved to learn before going to the school that cared about their test grades. And I literally had a grown man, an educator, a vice principal of the school tell me that we're so academically focused and we are so score focused, and we are very concerned about her test scores really driving down the average. And he said that to my face with not a hint of irony. And that's a problem.
It's a big problem. It's a huge problem. This is not the way that we should be doing any form of education at all, ever.
Especially for a fourth grader.
You get an education, it's how you get a robot. And I understand that we want to look at test scores and we think that test scores actually show us something. They don't. They don't show us anything. They don't. No. They show us that a kid was great at taking a test. They don't actually show learned things.
That they memorized information that was probably incorrect. Read the rest of the book. Like, most likely the stuff you taught them was actual bullshit. And congratulations, they regurgitated it.
And something that really, really upsets me too is how we... No, I lost it.
Real quick, Colin kind of, I don't know when he said this because I think it was during my rant, but he came in and said, my school has really high standards and their main goal is to prepare us to pass the state standardized test and to obtain credits to graduate. Like I get a detention if I don't do my homework. And that's absolutely it. They don't care if you understand a concept. They care if you can fill the right answer on a test. And that you say, well, we have to be able to test. We have to be able to understand if you're getting the concept. Sure. I am not ignorant to the fact that there needs to be some degree of accountability, but right now it's not accountability of an understanding. It's literally just a metric of success for the school.
Arbitrary one.
What's that?
An arbitrary one. Like,
it's an absolutely arbitrary one.
Well, and here's the thing too. This is where a lot of people are like, are you kidding me? But no, I'm not kidding. Our standards are too high. And when I say that, what I mean is, in the US, especially in California, and I'm saying especially in California because that's where I have like all of my experience. Sure. We expect way too much of our kids way too soon. And we look at other nations and we say, but look at China, but look at, the Nordic countries, but here's the thing, a lot of these nations, not including China, but a lot of these nations actually don't have as high of standards that we do in the early years. In the early years, they are really relaxed for years. I mean, they're not having kids start to read until, third grade. But in California, you actually have to at least in my area, your kids have to test to be able to get into kindergarten. And if they aren't able to read a little and write their name, then they can't go to kindergarten. They have to go to like a pre-kindergarten thing to learn those things, which already puts them behind. It's
Right.
ridiculous that we're expecting 4 or 5-year-olds to do that. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
There's no need for it. And so our standards are too high. I've looked at our math stuff. I likely have dyscalculia. I can't do, when I was in school, I kind of tapped, the highest I was able to get was like what, 7th grade math. These days, looking at the math standards, I'm about 4th grade. Like
Sure.
their math standards are ridiculous. And I have a handful of public school teacher friends who say the same, that like when it comes to 4th grade math is when everyone starts to really struggle. Like there's not really one kid who's actually passing, who's actually getting it, because they're trying too hard to shove too much into these little kids' brains. And we're doing it wrong. Like we're absolutely doing it wrong.
I want to highlight Catherine Cipriani's comment here. She says, having personal and family experience teaching in both public and non-traditional models. And she does. I know this person actually. This is an old and dear friend of mine, and she's a coach, and she does some really cool stuff. It is largely government regulation that is strangling traditional schooling.
I completely agree with that.
I couldn't agree more with that. And here, I'm going to very temporarily put on my tinfoil hat just for a second. Not long. I'll put it away here in a second, but it's really interesting. We have this, I jokingly quote the Lego movie. You're like, but President Business is a great man, and Octan's makes great stuff, like voting machines and history books. And like, we have this one organization that is teaching us what to think, what we know, how we'll be graded on it. Like, it's the same organization that determines how we think about it, what we know about it, that how to do it. And then they leave out all this other stuff, and they regulate, and they base funding on whether we can pass this test. And the test bears no resemblance on important information. And so it's an interesting problem. To have the schools, we need the money. To have the money, we have to obey the curriculum, and the curriculum doesn't pass the common sense test. And if you've been watching this show very long, you know that how much I love the phrase common sense.
Okay, Thomas Paine. But yeah,
thank you.
I completely agree. And I see that Debbie and Colin are talking about privatizing schools. Sure. And I don't disagree with what Debbie says about privatizing schools, meaning the rich are better educated, even in basic education, and illiterate and an innumerate population does not help society. I completely agree with you, Debbie. I completely agree. Unfortunately, that's the reality in America. The fact that we have private schools means that the wealthy are already taking advantage of that. I really want to see public schools do better for the exact reasons that you're pointing out here, but I don't think that we can do that without a complete overhaul of the way that we view education and the way that we structure the system. I have ideas, but who cares? Like, who cares about my ideas? And by the way, when I started college last year, my intent was to become a middle school or high school history teacher. I no longer want to do that. And I knew going into it that I would constantly be at odds with the organization. Like I'd constantly be in trouble with the hierarchy. And I was okay with that. But now having my daughter in public school and seeing just the curriculum, just what they expect of the kids, of parents, and what they're not teaching, I'm like, I can't do this. Yeah. I can't do it. Like, I cannot be a teacher. I would be fired within like the first 5 minutes.
Right.
For pulling a Utah Phillips and telling all the kids to run as fast as they can out of school because it's like bull. But like here's my thing. Yes, we are teaching too much too soon. That's one thing.
Sure.
We're also teaching things that don't effing matter.
Absolutely.
If you want to go into STEM, that's great. You should have that choice in the higher grades, maybe higher middle school, but definitely high school, to take those as electives. I think that most of our classes in the higher grades should be electives, and Absolutely. They should really be starting on, because at that point, you pretty much know what you're good at. You pretty much know what you enjoy. There's really no need, and I'm going to get a lot of flack here, but there's really no need to teach math after about the 6th grade level. There just isn't.
Not even like algebra 1. For the record, I failed algebra 1, so I'm not actually fighting. I just want to make sure I understand. So after basic arithmetic, please excuse my dare, but component, exponents, all that, like.
Yeah, and I'm including algebra 1. There's really no need to teach math. There really isn't.
Okay.
Now, if you want to go into a field that needs it, yeah, you can take that, and then you can take more in college if you need to take more in college. Because I find it fascinating that I'm going to college now and I'm having to do, like, all of us have to do that crap anyway.
Right.
So there's really, it's not, the need isn't there. And here's the thing, I'm a history buff, I'm a humanities buff. There's really no need to continue teaching literature and history in a certain sense after a certain grade 2. I think that elementary school should be for the elementary. You should be learning the most important elementary things, the elementaries of math, the elementaries of reading, like just those really important things. And then when you progress into higher grades, most of your education should be elective by choice, by what you want to move on to. And I understand that people love to discredit kids. They love to discredit kids and say that, oh, they're too young to know. We need to. No, I'm sorry. That's bull. That's ageist bull. And this is really the first time in human history where we look down our nose at kids so much and their intelligence. Kids know at that point, they know. Right. They know what they're good at. They know the gist of what they want to do. And I understand when we were all 14, we had ideas that I'm going to be a doctor. But we had a basic understanding of what it is that we were good at, what it is we were bad at, what it is that we could do. So why not? And one of the things that people say is we can't do that because the manpower. Yeah, the internet. Like, honestly, if COVID taught us anything, it's that there is so much education to be had online. Like, we have so many resources. This may not have worked 100 years ago.
Sure.
But it could work now if we would actually do it.
So I want to pivot just a little bit because I agree with everything you said, but I want to pivot just a slightly off of what we're teaching and why we're teaching it to how we're teaching it. And I did, in conducting all my interviews for the book, I reached out and I interviewed educators and psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. I interviewed a lot of different people, and I found there was this obvious paradigm. We figured out a thing they needed to know. We figured out the basics of the things they needed to be able to do. We broke it down to, this is how you multiply fractions. This is how we taught that system, and then we tested on that system and we walked away. But very rarely, very seldom read, basically never. I'm not saying that I never found the single curriculum or the single teacher that didn't do it, but it wasn't curriculumized. It was just happened upon. And that was, we don't teach critical thinking and we don't teach problem solving.
We don't teach logic.
What's that?
We don't teach logic.
No, we absolutely don't.
And the thing that kills me, because I got to complain about this. The thing that kills me is whenever I bring this up that we don't teach logic, I get this teacher saying, yes, we do. We teach it in math. No. That's not what I mean. I mean logic. I mean logic in regards to philosophy and critical thinking.
Right.
That's a different thing than the logic we learn in math and science. Is it similar? No. Yes, but it's a broader thing. And Debbie just brought up that she felt that probability, algebra, geometry, etc., got her thinking about more than just math. I don't disagree. However,
and I do. I'm not saying that it doesn't work for some people, but all those did to me is make me give up and recoil. It didn't help me think at all.
Well, I was gonna say is all of those things are actually included in the elementary education. Like, I've been homeschooling for, oh my gosh, 15 years. We cover all of those from like kindergarten on.
Right.
We get the basics of those. We don't need to go into it any more than that unless we want to. And we need to encourage the kids who want to do that. But if you don't, you're not a failure. You're not unintelligent for not getting geometry, for not getting algebra, for not getting trig. I mean, for Christ's sake, trig.
I never took trig.
Like, we can teach the basics of these ideas without really literally hammering them into the heads of kids. Like, it doesn't. Yeah.
So I want to talk about
disagree real quick. I disagree with Colin that mathematics help people with problem solving. I completely disagree. Math does not help with problem solving and analytical thinking. I actually think it does the opposite.
Look, I think that it could if we taught math. We don't. We teach how to follow steps. We do not teach anything resembling math. We teach how to follow steps.
Yeah.
And here, let me express that point. So I was teaching just before COVID, like literally like February, March of last year. I was actually speaking on a panel of educators. I was brought in to speak to high school teachers about teaching media and communications, like how to express what I do to a younger audience. And I was giving my whole song and dance about a lot of this stuff that's covered in the book and everything. And someone asked a question that was very similar, not the exact, but very similar to Mallory's question here. Do we think there's a place of teaching good mental health practice? Like, how do you teach this? Don't we have to teach them the rules? Don't we have to teach them these before we can teach them to break them? Don't we have to teach them the tutorialized set? Don't we have to teach them the steps? And I got really excited and I yelled, no.
Yep.
We don't. And here's what I mean. Let's start with art, and then I'll start with art where I love, and I'll end in math. If ever you've taken an art class, I'm going to tell a story that you've all lived, and it might not be exactly this one, but you've all seen it. One day you walked into class and like, today we're going to be learning about Van Gogh, and there's his Starry Night and his self-portrait, and maybe his sunflowers are up on the board. And they're going to spend 45 minutes to 4 hours, depending on the level of the curriculum, explaining to you every brushstroke, explaining to you his life, where he lived, what his paints were made of, what his brushes were made of, and where he fit in the impressionist epic. And then you'd be given an assignment, maybe for the rest of the day, maybe for the rest of the semester, but you were going to have to follow this tutorialized set of how to paint like Van Gogh. And then you would be graded based on your ability to mimic. That would be the test. And again, I'm being remarkably general, somewhat on purpose, but that's the test. However, here's the problem. Your brain doesn't work like that. Not just mine, which is a little neurodivergent. No one's does. You cannot solve a problem that your brain doesn't see. If your brain doesn't have a problem, doesn't have a parking space for it, you can't put anything there. The architecture doesn't exist for it. So if you come to me and say, hey, there's this guy that you've never heard of doing a thing that you don't care about, you should learn to do it just like he did in a way that you don't understand, go. It's not going to work. But if you did the exact opposite of that, if you said, hey, here's what Impressionism is, instead of making something look like a picture, like a photorealistic, like it's splotches and dots and lines, and you show a Monet and a Manet and you show all these different things, and then you go, there's craft supplies on the front desk, figure it out. Now, are they going to fail? Yes, it's going to be brilliant. Most of them are going to mess it up. Some of them will figure it out. Most of them won't. But when they come back to you and say, I don't understand it, how did Van Gogh do it? Now you can teach his genius, because now there's a parking spot because we understand the problem. So now we're going to shift to physics. I was taught the Pythagorean theorem before I knew what the hell the problem he was trying to solve. To this day, I don't understand why a squared plus b squared equals c squared matters at all, because no one cared to teach me that. And no matter how many times I asked, Kirk, it just works. Just plug in the damn numbers, get the answer, and turn in your test. No matter how many times I asked why, I literally learned why pi r square works on a TikTok in 60 seconds using an actual pizza, better than I learned in school, because he was explaining why it worked by literally chopping up a pizza, and he got it through to me in 60 seconds. Whereas an entire year of me asking, I don't understand, and they're like, Kirk, it doesn't matter. You don't need to understand it. Just plug in the damn numbers. I would totally agree that we're supposed to learn logic and math, but we don't. We learn following the steps. I know, because I don't think like that, and I begged to be explained it, and I was for years in 9 different schools. I wasn't in one school system. Please don't think like, that's just where you're from. 1st through 9th grade, never went to the same school 2 years in a row. I have lived everywhere, all public systems, 1 year of private school, and my entire life I begged to have someone explain to me why math worked and why we were doing it, and no one would. They're like, just follow the steps. And that's not an education, that's an automaton.
See, and the thing is for me too, is that so many of us fall through the cracks. I am 35 years old, and I just now was told I likely have dyscalculia.
Right.
Because I finally had someone who sat down with me and tried to follow me while I was doing math, like observed me while I was doing math, and was like, wait, are you doing this and this? And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm doing this and this, but the numbers, but blah, blah, blah. And then they start asking questions. How are you with distance? And I'm like, oh, please, like all of a sudden they're like, oh, hon, that's dyscalculia. I actually know logically, like I know I could tell you right now, I've taught my kids how to do it, how to read an analog clock. If I were to look at an analog clock, it would take me a minute or 2 or 5 to figure out what time it was. Like I have a really hard time with numbers. It's not just like math either. It's like in everything. I have a very hard time with numbers, but where I was finally able to learn fractions in the kitchen.
Right.
When I started cooking.
And now back to my thing, because now it wasn't an abstraction on a piece of paper or a chalkboard. It was literally a thing that you need. Half of a cup was a half of a cup. And it starts being, your brain cannot, it is not possible. If Neil deGrasse Tyson came on this show right now and started throwing his top level graduate stuff at us, we wouldn't retain any of it. And it's not that we weren't listening. It's not that we're not interesting. It's not that he's not a good teacher. It's that your brain has no ability to hold on to information that it has no structure to maintain. But all we do is we're completely outcome based. We show people how to arrive at the outcome that we're grading them on with no give a damn on them having the structure for it.
By the way, we're outcome based in society and politics as well. And it's a problem.
Absolutely are.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I just want to say a few things real quick. Responding to Debbie. So you said that I found maths up to about year 9 to be valuable to my life. We probably agree more than disagree. That's kind of my point, though. I did not. And I haven't found math valuable. I haven't used it in my life. My husband's used math in his life for his profession, and he still isn't using most of the math that he learned in the upper grades. So my point is that for people like you who found it valuable, you could continue to take math. You can continue to choose that as an elective. You could have a STEM focus or a math focus or whatever. But for people like me who don't need it and who are never going to use it, that's time wasted that I don't have to waste. That's time wasted and again, I'm big on the humanities. I'm big on literature. I'm big on history. There are too many people in this world who aren't going to use it. And there's arguments for those. I actually think that those teach empathy, mental health, but also critical thinking, etc., and having like a basis and a context for things going on in the current world that are important, more important than math at 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th level. And by the way, I don't know if we're talking the same levels though, because Australia versus America.
Yeah,
but
I was kind of curious that to myself, but I don't know.
I don't know. But so
Natalie,
the thing is here that's not going to work the same way for everyone. So I even think that literature to a certain extent, do we need kids reading Shakespeare?
Okay, so now come at me, bro.
I mean, me too. Me too. This is my love, and so is history. Right. But is it necessary?
So, no, not even a little bit. But right. I will say, Natalie answer this as well. So Natalie just chimed in, and she's absolutely being 100% genuine here. She says, my background in art has helped me in more in problem solving than anything I learned in math. And I will tell you, having lived with her for 17 years, that's 100% true. Her engineering background is 100% based in art, not in math. Like, it is all based in shapes and sizes and distance, but all from an artistic standpoint. That's why, going back to Mallory's question at the very top, what's better, private or public? And I added or charter or unschool or homeschool or other things. And the answer is Natalie found her understanding of the grand spatial design in art. Debbie said she found usefulness in math through grade 9. I like to say things. I liked theater. I took debate and rhetoric and speech, and I like the words and the shapes of words. I like the math of words. And I know that gets to tend to rile people up, but I love the structure of language. But
right, the symbology of it or whatever. Yeah.
What's that?
Like the symbolism within.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
it's like, I completely agree. I completely agree with what you're saying. And I agree with what Debbie's saying, but that's what I'm saying. I think that kids have that. And by the way, I hate calling teenagers kids. I hate calling them kids. This is a big thing for me because they're not children. And we tend to see a 16-year-old the same way we see an 8-year-old. And that is wrong. And a 16-year-old is a young adult, if anything, not
Right.
a child, closer
Yeah.
to a young adult. So Debbie says, but your 9 is pretty young still. Your 9 is 14 here.
Yeah.
I'm not
I was
sure
gonna say,
what it is there.
yeah, your 9 is 14 here.
14,
I
15.
will say, as much as I hate math, I will say that don't come at me. I'm a little bit more. I will say that up through 10th grade, which is when I learned geometry. So I will say that I was a little behind because of the story I told earlier. But I think that algebra 1, not algebra 2, F that, but algebra 1 and geometry, which I took in the 10th grade, I still use my basic understanding, which they didn't teach you very well, but I still use my basic understanding of shapes and 360 degrees and angles and stuff. That has still been useful to me just in general. But I didn't take physics in high school where it was allowed. I chose not to. I didn't take trig. I didn't take calculus. I didn't take any upper math. I stopped at algebra 2, which was the last one. And algebra 2 was a waste of a year. I wish they'd let me stop a year earlier. Because
I think the reason why I'm saying in that grade level is because, at least in California, they've been pushing that stuff back. Like, I don't remember doing as much geometry to the level my kids have done it in 4th grade, but they're doing it to like a kind of really big like level. And like they have elements of algebra 1. It's like they're pushing things back and retaining the title of it, if that makes any sense. And
yeah. So I want to point out, because I love the snarkiness of this comment, and I meant that positively. That wasn't in any way meant to be sarcastic. It's almost like we're all different people with different relationships to learning. Huh. And I cannot tell you how much I love this comment, because that embodies everything I'm saying here. Back to Mallory's comment at the beginning. What's the best way of teaching? The best way of teaching is based on your best way of learning. Natalie has also said to me in the past that Natalie's spatial reasoning is off the charts. And she learned that through dance, not through math. She learned that through, she knows exactly what her step is, and she knows exactly how many steps it is to the wall. Like, her spatial reasoning is pinpoint accurate. She learned that through swing, not through geometry. And that's because that is how her brain works. But we don't allow for that. Because we do not teach curiosity. Up to Catherine, who said that earlier, we should teach them curiosity. We don't teach curiosity. We don't teach exploration. We teach follow the damn steps, Kirk. Stop asking questions.
And see, this is where I think that kids should actually be in charge of their education a lot more too. I know that this is really, really hard for people to hear or accept, or like, it's like kids have to be like helicoptered at all times, especially with education. And I disagree. I think the reason why so many kids have to be helicoptered at all times is because we have helicoptered them at all times, so they don't know how to function. I have a relative who is a college professor, and he pointed out to me that he can always tell the homeschool kids because he gives instruction and they do it and they come back with their work and it's fine. Like, he just gives basic instruction, but the public school kids need more instruction. They
Sure.
need all of the instruction. They need hand holding in order to get what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And that's kind of like my thing with the public education system, because I mean, my daughters all have computers from their schools. So
Sure.
I homeschool 4 out of 5 of my kids, but we go through a charter. They get computers, but my public school kid gets a computer, and she got a computer before it went virtual. So all of the schools in my area do computer learning most of the time in school. Why can we not allow them to do independent computer learning? This idea that they all need to be learning the same curriculum. It reminds me of that cartoon, like a newspaper cartoon, a comic of, and I really wish I had it because I would send it to you and you could pop it up on the screen. But it's a guy sitting at a desk and he's like, okay, now for your test, you guys climb this tree. And he's talking to an elephant, a fish in a bowl, a monkey. Yeah. Who's going to be able to climb that tree?
Yeah.
You know, like that's.
No, absolutely. No, I wanted to comment on that as hold on. It's, we absolutely, it's where it was. Oh, here it is. It's Jen Call said, we stifle curiosity and individuality at almost every turn. And that is insanely true. We tell kids that they can accomplish anything. We're like, you can be anything. And then they're like, oh, I want to be a glass blower. And you're like, well, not a glass blower. I mean, you can be anything real. And I say that jokingly. That happened to my daughter. Like she was watching Fired Up or whatever. It's on Netflix.
Oh, yeah, my husband loves it. Yeah.
It's a glass blowing show. And my daughter, Salem, again, thought it was great. And her teacher told her, like, no, a real job. Like,
yeah, that kills me too. Actually, I've had a long discussion with a certain friend of mine who is a public school teacher about this. Stop telling kids that they can do everything, because they can't.
They absolutely can't.
They cannot. And it's okay to be honest about that. But also stop insisting that college is the best or only route, because it's not for everyone. It's not the best for everyone. And stop demeaning other jobs, because in my area, a lot of these kids are going to end up working with the family business, which is usually landscaping or something like that. But you know what? It pays the damn bills.
Sure.
And it's good work, and it's an art form, frankly. So this idea that we're going to sit and tell these kids you can do and be whoever you want to do and be, if that were the case, we would have no McDonald's. We would have no, it's not the case. And we need to stop demeaning other people. It's all good work. Even unpaid work is good work.
It's awesome. And and I was just talking with an artist that many of us know, Juniper Finley. I was just talking to her offline 3-4 days ago, and she's writing a paper about, artistic success. What is artistic success? When she's talking art, she literally means Picasso, Van Gogh. Like, what is artistic success? And she was asking my opinion on it. And she's like, is it price per painting? Is it number of paintings sold? Is it number of prints sold? How do you quantify success as an artist? And I was like, I'm the wrong person to ask, because I think you're asking the wrong question. That's what for me, it's impact. And that is that I think that for an artist to become a cultural norm, to penetrate with a meme, to make it through to the cultural subconscious, that is success. Is that worth anything? Maybe. I don't care. That's not. Why are we using money as the universal scorekeeper?
Right.
And what's really, really interesting is almost every, to your humanities and literature, I almost don't know of a kid in American high school. Debbie, you'll have to tell me if this is the same in Australia, but that didn't have to read either Fahrenheit 451, Brave New World, 1984, or some other similarly arid dystopian society book. Now, I read Brave New World and Fahrenheit 451. I still to this day never read 1984. But I will say that I've read the Sparks Notes, and I know kind of the basic plots of it. And the one thing that all of these stories have in common, written over a century ago, is that the biggest thing we have to fear is control of information. In Fahrenheit 451, books are illegal. In Brave New World, learning is illegal. In 1984, thought is illegal. Information control is the biggest and most insidious thing. And we have this thing where we are no longer teaching problem solving. We're no longer teaching we're teaching following the rules, and we are squelching independence and creativity outside of it. And I know that I'm coming off wacky here, but it's true.
No, I completely agree. And also to Ari, I keep saying
Ori.
that.
It's Ori. And yes, Animal Farm is absolutely on that list as well. And it's also about the control of information.
Animal Farm is the superior Orwell, but that's just me.
Whatever.
Animal Farm's amazing. I liked it more than 1984. I think it had 1984 was great too, but yeah.
Leslie Weplow said 20 years ago in Burgundy, France, was trying to foster sending young adults to vocations. They knew they needed that, and that not all kids were going to college. I love that. I kid you not. I would have loved the option to take welding and fabrication instead of algebra, because that I think I'd be using, even if I wasn't actively welding, the understanding of metallurgy, that useful information to me.
Yeah, and honestly, another thing that people really don't like to hear, but I think that they need to make it easier to test out of school.
Yeah.
Like,
And they should make a GED worth more. Because now, like, I know a kid who at 14 years old was getting so bullied. He at 14 years old, freshman year, went and got a 4.0 on his GED. And like, he's done fine, but like the GED really is sneered at. Like, it's as doesn't count. And you're like, it's a general equivalency diploma. General equivalent diploma. That's what it stands for. But no, it's A, sneered at, and B, hard to do. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, and here in California, you can't take the GED until you turn 16. You have to take the California exit thing, which is so much harder. And it's ridiculous because it's like all of this information that they're testing you on doesn't even freaking matter. And in California, in order to graduate, you don't even have to know this information. Like when I was a senior in high school, they started doing like a California exit exam thing. Sure. And a few years later, they stopped doing it because too few people were passing it. And honestly, I had a boyfriend who graduated from high school around the same time I was supposed to. He did not know who Cleopatra's, Jen can back me up on this because she was here during this conversation. He didn't know who Cleopatra was. He didn't know who George Washington was. He didn't know who Thomas Jefferson was. He didn't know who Julius Caesar was. Like we went.
You got our Thomas Jefferson. Score.
Yeah, we got our Thomas Jefferson, but he didn't know. And I just sat there flabbergasted, like how he graduated.
Yeah. And I will tell you this is actually kind of both funny and sad. I used to work for USCIS for a few years, immigration, for those who don't know, the United States Customs and Immigration Service. And I worked with a lot of processors. And so I took the test you have to pass to become a citizen. And like, it's strangely hard. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I passed it, but it wasn't like, I was like, I know people that couldn't. Like, it's a hard test.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, kind of in just grand summation, like we've actually talked through basically every point of this chapter, and we could go around and around on it. But basically we teach children and young adults, and I'm intentionally, like, because I agree with you, they're separate, but we're doing it to both. We're teaching children pre-12 and young adults pre-18 that having an opinion is somehow bad. We have more and more examples of just do what the teacher said because the teacher said it. It's authoritarian, it's autocratic. We are stripping out, and I'd love to. I know Ori's from the UK and Debbie's from Australia, and Leslie lived in France. Like we have all of these other bases. I've lived most of my life, not all, most of my life in the US. I'd love to know if this carries through to other Western cultures, but we are telling kids that they need to fall in line better, show your work, and you can get a question that you got the answer right, but got the answer right the wrong way, and you'll get partial or no credit because you did it wrong. Mm-hmm. And we're institutionalizing this. And now we're having this major STEM issue. No one's curious. Everyone's afraid to step out of line. And we're wondering why no one's curious anymore. Because we spent 12 years systemically beating the shit out of them.
Well, and it's not only that, but we wonder why people can't critically think or handle dialogue on the internet. Like, this is where, and I know that this is also unpopular, but this is where scientism becomes a problem too, where, listen, I'm a big fan of science and peer reviewed and everything. Hey, Lupe, and all of that stuff too. But there comes a level of, I saw a meme that said it was scientifically proven. So I'm going to say because it's science.
Oh, absolutely.
Where it's become like this thing where we're not like critically thinking even about the information that we're being given. Like, I think we've already complained about statistics before and the problems with statistics.
The number of TikToks I have seen with someone green screened in front of a statistic that does not say anything near what they're purporting to say, is like, studies done by that organization say that this thing. I'm like, first off, that's not what that says. Second off, no. And like, but we've taught rhetoric and we've taught rhetoric and straw man fallacies and an ability. We have taught people the one problem solving thing we actually have done a decent job of teaching is how to win an argument when you don't know what the hell you're talking about. That we teach pretty well. And it's terrifying it's an interesting dichotomy. And so, kicking it to you for sort of a summation, fix it. What do we do? What's the answer?
We stop focusing on one thing over another and stop focusing on obedience and following instruction, and we start teaching kids how to be curious and how to learn and give them breathing room. Stop looking down our noses at them and thinking that we need to follow them around wiping their noses and teaching them how to do XYZ. But beyond that, we stop villainizing certain things and raising other things. STEM is great. It's not the be all end all. Humanities are great. It doesn't mean STEM isn't great. Like, we need to stop mocking all of these different things and just realize that all of them are needed to have like a well-rounded education, like
Agreed.
a true well-rounded education. And we really cannot fix this without getting rid of the way that we think about education. What is education for? Does anyone know anymore? Because honestly, I think that the answer for public schools and schools in general is, what is education for? For workers, to get workers out there, to get money made. And that's not conducive to a society that continues to progress.
Debbie, we're going to talk about that. Yes, I want to unpack that, but that is not so she was asking, I don't want to steer the conversation in this direction, but as a note for you guys for afterwards, curious if you've read the F.W. Pinner stuff on curriculum versus pedagogy. Yes, and we will be kind of talking about that at some point.
Sure, chapters is what you mean?
What's that? Yeah. In later, we have there are 3 different chapters on education in the book. This is the first. There's one on education in each of the 3 sections. But Debbie also said you can't fix it while trying to make education cheaper and cheaper. It's part of the reason there's no space for exploration. And then I also want to come to what Mallory just said. Do you think any relevant changes will be made after this whole pandemic learning from home situation? And the answer to that is, from my perspective, is I think so. Because I think that a lot of people, not most, not even many, just a lot, thrived. Like Maggie said, that people realized that they could work on their own and they would do just fine. It was homeschool. But my children and I specifically went to the grad school. I applied to and got into 4 grad schools. I went to the one that was local, not because it was the best. I kind of think that it was, but that's not the point. I went to it because if I can't argue with the teacher, is it really even class? Like, if I can't, I need that interaction. So several of my kids are really struggling because they need the interaction, and Zoom calls ain't cutting it. What I think that we're going to find, in my opinion, after this whole pandemic, is that we're going to see the grand spectrum of those that rose and those that fall, and the alternatives we have in place and options and the different learning styles that we had never considered before, because we had a mechanism in place that was widget making, and now this new factory floor that has different lanes and different options. And I think that that's going to we have data now. We have data that can lead to alternatives. Again, those alternatives aren't what my kids need. My kids need to be back in damn school where they can talk, but the smaller group is really helping them because they're back now, but in groups of 8, not groups of 30. Like, it's good.
Yeah, but it could also go, I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I think that it should, but it won't. And I think that, if anything, since this started, there's been a lot of fear in the homeschooling community that anything, because a lot of kids are failing, a lot of kids aren't doing great with the at-home model. 90% of that is because the schools weren't prepared for an at-home model, and so they're really behind because they weren't prepared, and they had my kid had 3 months off of school because they didn't know what they were doing. But that they will say, see, this is why homeschooling doesn't work. They'll use it against homeschoolers, which I think is a stretch and would be dumb, and therefore would not put it past the state of California to do so. But
sure.
I disagree, Colin, but
Which one, this one?
that's not how I personally learn.
I think Zoom call teaching cuts the interpersonal relationship with your educators, which limits the understanding. And I completely agree. Again, I very much specifically went to the university that would allow me to go in and talk to a teacher and say, make it make sense. And for the record, my professors loved me. My classmates hated me because I was the same age as most of my professors. And so they'd be teaching something that's like, Cap, I'm calling bullshit. Make that make sense, because no. And people were like, Kirk, just let him teach. I was like, no, I will not let him teach.
You just described me in high school. My husband can back me up on this. You just described my entire high school experience.
And I mean, my professors loved me, and they'd even tell me afterwards, like, you make this fun, you make this interesting. And the other 23-year-olds that are in grad school with me are like, good God, I just want to go home. And I'm like, then don't come to grad school.
But again, this is why I think we should have options, because I don't learn better that way.
Right.
I'm a very strong introvert. And the weird thing is I don't learn by being shown or being spoken to. I learn by you writing it down and showing it to me that way. Right. So I actually learn way better through textbook, through email, I have to read it to understand. There are so many times where a teacher will be trying to explain something to me, or in the past when they were trying to explain something to me, and I'll say, can you just write it down? Because that will be so much easier for me. Good luck trying to get me to follow a recipe if you're talking to me. I will hand you a piece of paper and ask you to write it down.
I feel like I owe Mallory money, because she set this whole call up, with the most perfect question of what's the best way. And the answer is that question is the problem. I'm not because everyone's asking that question. Well, what's best? Is it a charter school? What's the best curriculum? What's the best system? There is no system that will work for everyone. That doesn't exist. No. And the fact that we keep trying to make it work is the problem. We need to make this a choose your own adventure. We need to splinter it out into subgroups faster and younger, so that people can find their niche. Their niche, good gosh, 3 times, and how to find, because you and I, Maggie, we communicate similarly. We have very similar interests, but we have polar opposite learning styles. I'm a hard extrovert, and if I can't fight you on it, then I'm going to learn nothing. Natalie can attest to this. I had a goal. Kids, if you're watching, do not have this goal. This was the stupidest goal of my life. Talking undergrad, not grad school. My goal was to get through undergrad, my entire bachelor's degree, without ever opening a textbook. And I did. With relatively good degrees, for relatively good grades. I don't read well. I have dyslexia. I don't read. My reading comprehension is really low. I don't take notes well because of ADD. So I would just go in, I would play Tetris on my phone, I would listen, I would call up my classmates and argue with them about what the teacher said, and then I would get 98s on all my tests. If I can't engage, I am learning just as much through this podcast as I did writing the book, because fighting about it is how I process information.
Well, it's really interesting because discussing is how it helps me too. But again, I really prefer the written format. I really prefer doing it online and whatever, but having discussions is really helpful for me too. However, what I find that annoys the crap out of me, this is my experience on Zoom class, which I have every single damn day, is that I sit there and I think, this is just better explained in the textbook. This is better in the textbook. And then we have to pause because someone wants to tell a story about their great aunt's roommate that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but they're trying to make it have something to do with what we're talking about. And I'm like, I get it. You're lonely. You want to talk to people. That's fine. Can you do it on your own time?
This is the best example ever, because I will tell you 100% that I learned 300% more from the stupid anecdote than I did from the textbook. And there's nothing that I hate more than the idiots who say, great, another meeting that could have been an email. No, it couldn't, because I didn't read the email. Had I read it 15 times, I still wouldn't have gotten it without the stupid grandma anecdote. That is what I anchored the information to. That's how I think. Yeah. So Natalie says it was infuriating to watch him ace tests he had not studied for. I did study. My studying is called arguing. Like, but
there's definitely tests I don't have to study for that irks my husband to no end, which is really funny because I have a hard time. Like, everyone asks me, when did you leave the Mormon church? When did you join Catholicism? I cannot remember those dates to save my damn life, but I remember historical dates.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Like, really what?
I cannot remember the names of my children. In my defense, I have many. I cannot remember the names of the people that I just met. They just said it. We just shook hands. Is it Tiffany? Is it Kimberly? Is it Lindsay? I cannot tell you. But ask me to name the full above the line cast and crew of every 90s teen comedy. Done right now in chronological order. Anyway, in kind of grand summation is that I think the answer to all of this is that there isn't a system. I can't have the meeting that should have been an email. If it was an email, I didn't read it. And if I did, I didn't get it. I needed the meeting. I needed to be able to fight. And Maggie needed the textbook. I needed time to read it. I think the answer is that until we stop trying to treat people as cogs that can be cranked out, until we get over that mentality that there is a curriculum that can my cousin is an educator of educators. She's a PhD in mathematical education, and she says we need to stop trying to make the teacher proof curriculum and start working on the curriculum proof teacher, because we're not working on great teachers. We're working on standardized curriculums, and it's never going to work.
It isn't working. By the way, the Maggie has to take time to read the textbook. You're going to hate me because my husband hates me for this. Speed reader.
Yeah, no, I hate you already, but that was before you said that. Awesome. So guys,
I can read the chapter of the textbook way faster than the freaking class. I'm sorry. I'm bitter.
No. And then Natalie said, please. She didn't say please. I'm saying please stop letting type A's rule the world. And it's true. It's back to that meme you were talking about, that comic of, please, the final exam is climb this tree and there's a monkey, an elephant, and a fish. Like only one creature can do that. So it really comes down to what's the best curriculum? That problem is the problem. That question is the problem.
And Catherine is exactly right.
What did Catherine say? Oh, yeah. As a teacher, the best teacher in the world can't make bad curriculum work. Yeah. So next week we're going to be talking chapter 5, and chapter 5 is when we really start to is the last part. We're coming in the next week or two. We're coming to the end of part 1. Part 1 is the history of thinking, and it's all of this stuff. It's the thought development. It's the history. It's the Thomas Jefferson. It's the Henry Ford. It's all of the basics of how we got to where we are. And then we're going to start kicking off in the next few weeks into the making friends with the mouse, and that'll make sense later. So next week is chapter 5, which I believe is called Credit Misfiled. It starts off with a great quote by Nicolas Cage. I wouldn't want to miss that if I were you.
Face Off.
What's that? It's not.
Well, it should be, because Face Off is the best Nicolas Cage movie.
No, I'm not arguing with that, but I will say that Vampire's Kiss, and the quote that I use is the one where he dramatically says the alphabet 100% non-ironically. So next week, Tuesday, 9:00 Eastern, 6:00 Pacific, or whatever time it is for you, Ori. She's
and Debbie.
Like, I don't even know. Like, this is a global broadcast right now. But awesome. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye, guys.
Bye.